Son kicks out mother to please wife, unaware of what she was hiding. Caleb Harrison never imagined that September morning would change his life forever. The argument that started at breakfast had escalated brutally, and now he was pointing toward the dusty road leading away from his Harrison Creek farm. It was when his wife Tiffany whispered in his ear the words that sealed his mother's, Mrs. Martha's, fate. She had convinced her husband that his mother was interfering too much in their lives, creating problems where none existed, and making the couple's harmony impossible. What Caleb didn't know was that Tiffany hid secrets that would turn that expulsion into his greatest source of regret. Mrs. Martha, at 72, held firmly the old leather suitcase that had belonged to her late husband. Her grey hair was covered by a dark scarf, and her simple clothes contrasted with Tiffany's vibrant purple dress. The Harrison Creek farm they had lived on for decades silently witnessed that painful moment, while the donkey grazed peacefully in the yard, oblivious to the human drama unfolding. The situation had begun to deteriorate months earlier when Tiffany started making small comments about her mother-in-law. Initially, they were subtle observations about how Mrs. Martha interfered with household decisions or how her old-fashioned ways of doing things were outdated. Caleb, wanting to keep peace in the marriage, began siding with his wife without realizing what was really happening. Tiffany was only 28 when she married Caleb, who was 35 at the time. The age and experience difference created a complex dynamic in the family, especially with Mrs. Martha, who had raised her son alone after her husband's early departure. The mother-in-law saw in Tiffany a spoiled and calculating young woman, while the daughter-in-law considered her mother-in-law a stubborn and controlling woman. What neither of the men in the house knew was that Tiffany had developed an addiction to online gambling that consumed a large part of her income and savings. She spent hours on the computer betting on virtual casinos, convinced that a big win was always within reach. The losses piled up quickly, and she needed to find a way to hide the growing debts. The first big lie happened on a Thursday afternoon. Tiffany had lost a significant amount on a bet and was desperate to recover the money before Caleb found out. She invented a story about Mrs. Martha criticizing her cooking in front of the neighbors, claiming her mother-in-law had said she didn't know how to cook properly. Caleb was upset and spoke with his mother, who vehemently denied saying anything of the sort. Mrs. Martha was confused by the accusation. She had always treated Tiffany with respect, even when she disagreed with some of her attitudes. In fact, she often praised her daughter-in-law's cooking, especially her apple pies that were popular in the neighborhood. Tiffany's lie created the first real misunderstanding between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, planting a seed of distrust that would grow rapidly. The lies became more frequent and elaborate. Tiffany began claiming that Mrs. Martha went through her personal things, criticized her way of dressing, and even made malicious comments about her ability to be a good wife. Each story was carefully crafted to provoke Caleb's indignation without seeming completely absurd. Caleb, who deeply loved both his mother and his wife, found himself in an impossible position. He began paying more attention to the interactions between the two women, but Tiffany was skilled at creating situations where she appeared to be the victim. When Mrs. Martha tried to clarify the misunderstandings, Tiffany interpreted her explanations as personal attacks. Tiffany's gaming addiction intensified when she discovered sports betting apps. She started betting on football, convinced that her knowledge of the sport would help her win money. In reality, she knew nothing about football, and her bets were based on misguided hunches and dubious tips from websites. The debts began to pile up alarmingly. Tiffany had taken out online loans with predatory interest rates, convinced she could pay everything off with a big win on the games. When she realized she was in a downward spiral, she began looking for ways to get extra money without her husband discovering her desperate financial situation. It was then that Tiffany began to notice how respected Mrs. Martha was in the local community. Her mother-in-law had solid relationships with merchants, neighbors, and influential people in the area. Tiffany began to suspect that her mother-in-law had financial resources she kept secret, a hunch that would prove partially correct, but for reasons completely different from what she imagined. Mrs. Martha did indeed have some financial secrets, but not for the reasons Tiffany assumed. After her husband's departure, she had worked tirelessly to maintain the farm and raise her son alone. Over the years, she had made small investments and savings that slowly accumulated. Furthermore, she had inherited a small property from a distant uncle, but kept this fact a secret because she wanted to leave everything as an inheritance for Caleb. The situation reached a critical point when Tiffany discovered she had lost all the money from the couple's joint account in a single night of disastrous betting. She had bet on the final of a state championship, convinced she had found insider information about the outcome. The next morning she realized she had not only lost her savings, but also owed a substantial amount to digital loan sharks who threatened to expose her situation. Desperate, Tiffany decided she needed to get rid of Mrs. Martha to have total access to the family's resources and convince Caleb to sell some assets to help her financially. She developed an elaborate plan to make the living situation so unbearable that her husband would have no choice but to ask his mother to move out. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Tiffany's strategy began with small provocations she knew would irritate Mrs. Martha. She began deliberately changing the household arrangements her mother-in-law had maintained for decades, claiming she wanted to modernize the environment. When Mrs. Martha expressed her preference for the old arrangements, Tiffany interpreted this as resistance to change and excessive control. Tiffany also began making changes to the household routine on purpose to create friction. She would change meal times without notice, reorganize the kitchen so Mrs. Martha couldn't find the utensils, and started inviting people over at times she knew would bother her mother-in-law. Mrs. Martha, noticing the changes in her daughter-in-law's behavior, tried to talk to Caleb about her concerns. She explained that she felt Tiffany was deliberately trying to push her away from the family, but couldn't understand why. Caleb, already influenced by his wife's stories, interpreted his mother's concerns as paranoia and possessiveness. The situation became even more complicated when Tiffany began intercepting Mrs. Martha's phone conversations. Her mother-in-law kept in regular contact with some distant relatives and old friends from when she was married. During one of these calls, Tiffany overheard Mrs. Martha casually mention a property that needed to have its documentation updated. Tiffany didn't fully understand the context of the conversation, but she realized her mother-in-law owned some kind of property she hadn't mentioned to the family. This fueled her suspicions that Mrs. Martha was hiding significant financial resources. In reality, the property in question was a small rural plot that needed document updates, but it held more sentimental than monetary value. Based on this partial information, Tiffany intensified her efforts to push her mother-in-law away. She began inventing more serious stories, claiming that Mrs. Martha had made offensive comments about her family of origin. Tiffany came from a humble family in the neighboring town, and she knew any suggestion of class prejudice would be particularly painful for Caleb, who valued equality and respect. The accusations became more specific and cutting. Tiffany claimed that Mrs. Martha had said she wasn't good enough for the Harrison family, that she came from a family of manual laborers and didn't have the proper education to be the wife of a farm owner. These allegations were completely false, but they were presented with so many convincing details that Caleb began to believe them. Mrs. Martha was devastated when she learned of the accusations. She had never made any derogatory comments about Tiffany's background. In fact, she admired the young woman's determination and had always treated her family with affection and respect. The accusations not only hurt her deeply, but also confused her, as she couldn't understand why Tiffany would invent such cruel stories. Caleb, seeing his mother vehemently denying the accusations, began to interpret her denials as attempts to hide her prejudice. Tiffany had chosen her lies carefully, knowing exactly which buttons to push to cause maximum emotional impact on her husband. She knew Caleb had a special sensitivity to issues of social justice and inequality. The situation reached its peak one September morning when Tiffany claimed to have overheard Mrs. Martha talking on the phone with a neighbor about how she was inadequate for the family. According to Tiffany, her mother-in-law had said she regretted accepting the marriage and hoped Caleb would find a more suitable wife. This final lie was crafted to cause an irreversible rift between mother and son. Caleb exploded with anger when he heard this last accusation. He confronted his mother immediately, demanding explanations for the alleged comments. Mrs. Martha, completely lost and hurt, couldn't even respond coherently to the accusations, which Caleb interpreted as an admission of guilt. The argument quickly escalated into a devastating family fight. Caleb accused his mother of trying to sabotage his marriage out of jealousy and possessiveness. Mrs. Martha, with tears in her eyes, tried to explain she had never said any of those things, but her words were lost in her son's fury. Tiffany remained discreet during the argument, occasionally adding comments that intensified the conflict. It was at that moment that Caleb made the decision that would change his life forever. Influenced by anger and Tiffany's manipulations, he told his mother she was no longer welcome in his home. The pain on Mrs. Martha's face was immediate and devastating, but she maintained her dignity, simply nodding and going to pack her things. Mrs. Martha spent the rest of that morning packing her few belongings in the old leather suitcase. She had spent decades in that house, creating memories with her husband and son, working the land, and building a life based on love and dedication. Now, at 72 years old, she found herself forced to leave everything behind because of lies she couldn't comprehend. As she packed her things, Mrs. Martha found some old letters she had carefully kept over the years. Among them was correspondence from the county clerk's office about the property inherited from her uncle. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should tell Caleb the truth about her resources, but decided it wouldn't make a difference. If her son had chosen to believe his wife's words over trusting her, any explanation would be useless. Tiffany discreetly watched her mother-in-law's preparations for departure, feigning sadness but feeling internally victorious. She believed she had eliminated the only obstacle to convincing Caleb to help her financially. With Mrs. Martha out of the way, she could present her debt situation as a couple's problem that needed to be solved together. The moment of farewell was charged with emotion and tension. Caleb, still consumed by anger, stood firm in his decision, but something in his heart began to ache when he saw his mother walking slowly toward the road with her suitcase. Mrs. Martha didn't look back or utter a word of reproach. Her silent dignity somehow made the moment even more painful. Tiffany hugged her husband and whispered words of comfort, claiming that this difficult decision had been necessary for the good of their marriage. She painted a bright future where they could live in harmony without her mother-in-law's interference. Caleb wanted to believe those words, but a strange feeling in his chest prevented him from feeling completely at peace with what had happened. In the first days after Mrs. Martha's departure, the house felt strangely quiet. Caleb had grown accustomed to his mother's constant presence, her small morning routines, the smell of the coffee she made at dawn, and the sound of her nightly prayers. The absence of these familiar details created a void he hadn't anticipated. Tiffany, for her part, immediately began implementing the next phase of her plan. She waited a few days for Caleb to get used to the new dynamic in the house, and then began subtly introducing the subject of her financial difficulties. She started by mentioning small debts and credit card troubles, testing her husband's reaction. Caleb, still feeling guilty about the situation with his mother, was particularly receptive to his wife's problems. He wanted to somehow make up for the recent family trauma by being a more present and attentive husband. When Tiffany mentioned her financial struggles, he immediately offered his help, without questioning much about the origin of the debts. The first amount Tiffany asked to borrow was relatively small, claiming she needed to pay off some purchases she had made for the house before the wedding. Caleb lent the money without hesitation, happy to be able to help his wife and demonstrate his trust in her. What he didn't know was that this money would be immediately lost in a new session of online betting. With her husband's money, Tiffany believed she could recover her previous losses and solve all her financial problems at once. She chose an international championship to place high bets, convinced she had developed a foolproof system based on statistics she found online. The reality was brutal. She lost everything in a single night. Tiffany's situation became desperate when she received threatening messages from digital loan sharks demanding overdue payments. The threats included public exposure of her financial situation and even contact with family members. Tiffany realized her lies and manipulations had created a situation she couldn't get out of alone. That's when she decided to tell part of the truth to Caleb, but in a manipulated way to present herself as the victim. She claimed she had been deceived by a friend who convinced her to make investments that turned out to be scams. According to her version, she had entrusted her savings to this friend, who disappeared with the money, leaving her in debt and desperate. Caleb was shocked by the revelation, but his first reaction was one of protection and support for his wife. He blamed himself for not noticing the difficulties she was going through and immediately offered all his help to resolve the situation. Tiffany cried with relief upon realizing her version of the story had been accepted without question. During the following weeks, Caleb sold some farm equipment and animals to help Tiffany pay off her supposed debts to the scammers. He believed he was saving his wife from a terrible situation of which she was merely an innocent victim. In reality, the money continued to be lost on bets, perpetuating the vicious cycle of lies and losses. The situation became even more complicated when one of the neighbors casually mentioned to Caleb that he had seen Tiffany several times downtown, frequenting places that looked like betting houses. The comment was made without malice, just as a casual observation, but it planted a seed of doubt in Caleb's mind. When questioned about these trips to town, Tiffany quickly invented an explanation about looking for work to help with the family expenses. She claimed she was exploring job opportunities at different commercial establishments, which was why she had been seen in various places. Caleb accepted the explanation, but began paying more attention to his wife's movements. Meanwhile, Mrs. Martha had temporarily settled in the house of a distant cousin in a neighboring town. The cousin, Mrs. Beverly, had offered temporary shelter, but the situation was not ideal for either of them. The house was small, and the presence of another person created practical and emotional discomforts. Mrs. Martha spent her days helping with her cousin's household chores and trying to emotionally process what had happened to her family. She couldn't understand how the relationship with her son had deteriorated so quickly and so painfully. Tiffany's accusations deeply confused her, as she recognized no truth in them. During a conversation with Mrs. Beverly, Mrs. Martha revealed for the first time the full extent of the problems she was facing. The cousin was outraged to hear about Tiffany's false allegations and tried to convince Mrs. Martha to fight for the truth. She suggested that Mrs. Martha seek out Caleb for a sincere conversation, but the proud woman refused to beg for understanding. Mrs. Beverly, concerned about her cousin's situation, decided on her own to conduct some discreet investigations about Tiffany. She knew people in the town where Caleb lived and began asking subtle questions about the reputation and behavior of the young wife. What she discovered was disturbing and confirmed her suspicions about Tiffany's manipulative character. One of the most significant discoveries was that Tiffany had been regularly seen at betting houses and gaming establishments in the area. Several people commented on her betting habits and how she always seemed to be looking for ways to borrow money. This information painted a completely different picture from the image of an innocent victim she had presented. Mrs. Beverly also discovered that Tiffany had lied about several aspects of her past life. The story about fraudulent investments had no basis in reality, and there was no evidence that she had been a victim of any kind of financial scam. In fact, everything indicated that his financial problems were the result of a gambling addiction. Armed with this information, Mrs. Beverly tried once again to convince Mrs. Martha to confront the situation. She argued that Caleb had the right to know the truth about his wife, and that allowing the lies to continue would only cause more damage in the long run. Mrs. Martha hesitated, torn between the desire to protect her son and the fear of being rejected again. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Meanwhile, Caleb's financial situation began to deteriorate rapidly due to Tiffany's constant requests for money. He had sold almost all non-essential equipment from the farm and was beginning to consider selling land to continue helping his wife. The irony of the situation was that he was impoverishing himself to sustain his wife's gambling addiction, unaware of the true nature of her financial troubles. Tiffany, feeling pressure from creditors and realizing that Caleb's resources were not endless, began looking for other sources of money. She remembered the property she had heard Mrs. Martha mention on the phone and began asking subtle questions about the Harrison family inheritance. Caleb, focused on his own financial problems, didn't pay much attention to his wife's questions. The situation reached a critical point when Tiffany received an ultimatum from digital loan sharks, demanding immediate payment of all accumulated debts. The threats became more specific and included the possibility of public exposure of her financial situation. Tiffany realized she needed a desperate solution for a problem that had grown far beyond her control. It was then that she decided to take a bolder step in her manipulation. Tiffany began suggesting to Caleb that they should try to reconcile with Mrs. Martha, not out of genuine remorse, but because she had discovered through conversations with neighbors that her mother-in-law possessed significant financial resources that could help the family. Caleb was confused by his wife's sudden change in attitude. For months, Tiffany had insisted that his mother's presence was harmful to the marriage, and now she was suggesting reconciliation for financial reasons. He questioned the sincerity of this change of heart, but Tiffany argued that she had reflected on the situation and realized that family was more important than pride. Tiffany's true motivation was to discover the extent of Mrs. Martha's financial resources and find a way to convince Caleb to borrow money from his mother. She had concluded that her only hope of resolving her debts was by tapping into the family resources she hadn't yet accessed. The reconciliation would merely be a means to achieve her financial goals. Caleb, for his part, had spent weeks feeling guilty about how he had treated his mother. Nights were particularly difficult when he remembered happy childhood moments and the dedication Mrs. Martha had shown in raising him alone. Tiffany's suggestion of a possible reconciliation resonated with his suppressed feelings of remorse. However, Caleb was also worried about how his mother would react to seeing him again. He had spoken harsh words on the morning he asked her to leave, accusing her of trying to destroy his marriage. The possibility that she might not want to forgive him terrified him, but it also motivated him to try to repair the damage he had caused. The decision to seek out Mrs. Martha was made on a particularly difficult afternoon, when Caleb received a call from an old family friend asking about her well-being. The friend had heard rumors about family problems and wanted to make sure Mrs. Martha was okay. The friend's genuine concern made Caleb realize how much other people valued and respected his mother. During the call, the friend casually mentioned that he had seen Mrs. Martha in a neighboring town, looking thinner and visibly shaken. This information hit Caleb like a punch to the gut, making him realize the real impact his actions had caused in his mother's life. The image of Mrs. Martha suffering alone because of his decisions filled him with remorse and determination to fix the situation. Tiffany, sensing that her husband was emotionally prepared for a reconciliation, intensified her efforts to convince him to seek out his mother. She presented carefully crafted arguments about forgiveness, family, and the importance of overcoming personal pride. Internally, she was anxious to learn the true state of Mrs. Martha's finances and find ways to exploit those resources. The trip to find Mrs. Martha was marked by tension and expectation. Caleb drove in silence, lost in thoughts about how to approach his mother and whether she would be willing to forgive him. Tiffany, beside him, pretended to share his emotional concerns, but in reality was planning how she would steer the conversation to uncover information about her mother-in-law's finances. When they arrived at Mrs. Beverly's house, they found Mrs. Martha helping her cousin tend to a small garden in the backyard of the property. The sight of his mother, noticeably thinner and with a deep sadness in her eyes, impacted Caleb in a devastating way. He immediately realized her suffering had been much greater than he had imagined. Mrs. Martha was surprised and visibly tense upon seeing her son and daughter-in-law arriving. Her first reaction was defensive, thinking they had come for more confrontations or accusations. She stood up slowly, wiped her hands on her skirt, and looked at them with a mixed expression of hope and caution. Caleb approached hesitantly, the words stuck in his throat by emotion. When he finally managed to speak, his voice came out trembling and laden with remorse. He asked for forgiveness for how he had treated his mother, and tried to explain that he had been influenced by misunderstandings and manipulations that he was only now beginning to understand. Mrs. Martha listened silently to her son's words, but her expression remained guarded and careful. Decades of life experience had taught her to be cautious about promises of change, especially after the deep pain she had experienced. She wanted to believe in her son's sincerity, but she also needed to protect her heart from more disappointment. Tiffany watched the interaction between mother and son closely, looking for the right opportunity to subtly introduce questions about financial resources. She pretended to be genuinely moved by the possibility of reconciliation, even shedding a few tears to demonstrate her supposed sincerity. The initial conversation was tense and full of unspoken words. Caleb tried to explain how he had been misled by false information about his mother's attitudes, but without directly specifying that Tiffany had lied. Mrs. Martha, sensing the omission, directly questioned the specific accusations that had been made against her. It was a crucial moment of truth. Caleb found himself in a position where he needed to choose between protecting his wife or being honest with his mother about the origin of the lies that had caused the family rift. The emotional pressure of the situation, combined with the guilt he felt, finally led him to admit that he had been manipulated by false information provided by Tiffany. The revelation dropped like a bomb in the conversation. Mrs. Martha looked directly at Tiffany, finally understanding the extent of the manipulations she had suffered. The daughter-in-law, realizing her lies were being exposed, tried to defend herself by claiming she had been misunderstood and that her concerns about her mother-in-law were legitimate, even if poorly expressed. Mrs. Beverly, who had been listening to the conversation from the kitchen, decided it was time to reveal the information she had uncovered about Tiffany's activities in town. She entered the room carrying a tray of coffee, but with a determined expression that indicated she had something important to say. Mrs. Martha's cousin began to methodically recount all the discoveries she had made about Tiffany's gambling habits, her lies about the origin of her debts, and the questionable reputation she had developed in the region. Each revelation was like a piece of a puzzle that finally began to form a clear picture of reality. Caleb listened to the revelations with growing shock, realizing how much he had been deceived and manipulated. The debts he had helped pay off were not the result of scams or fraudulent investments, but rather a gambling addiction that had been carefully hidden from him. The discovery left him devastated and furious. Tiffany tried to deny the accusations, but the evidence was too consistent and specific to be refuted. She realized her web of lies was crumbling and that her only option was to try to minimize the damage by partially admitting her faults while trying to maintain some sympathy from Caleb. Tiffany's partial confession revealed the extent of her gambling addiction, but she still tried to present herself as a victim of a disease that was beyond her control. She claimed she had hidden the addiction out of shame and fear, and that she had lied about Mrs. Martha because she genuinely believed her mother-in-law was trying to harm her marriage. Caleb found himself in a devastating position, realizing he had destroyed his relationship with his mother based on elaborate lies from his wife. Guilt and anger mixed into an overwhelming emotion that left him temporarily unable to fully process the situation. He looked at his mother, searching for some sign that there was still hope of repairing the damage caused. Mrs. Martha, despite all the pain she had suffered, felt compassion for her son upon realizing how much he too had been a victim of Tiffany's manipulations. Her life experience told her that punishing Caleb would only perpetuate the cycle of family pain. However, she also knew that broken trust could not be easily restored. The situation became even more complicated when Mrs. Martha revealed that she had made an important decision during the weeks of separation from the family. She had decided to sell the property inherited from her uncle and use the money to establish herself independently, without relying financially on her son. The decision had been motivated by the need to preserve her dignity and autonomy. The revelation about the property confirmed Tiffany's suspicions about her mother-in-law's financial resources, but in a way she had not anticipated. Instead of discovering an opportunity to exploit family resources, she found she had lost any chance of accessing them due to her own lies and manipulations. Caleb was shocked to discover that his mother had her own resources that she had kept secret. He wondered why she had never mentioned the inherited property, and Mrs. Martha explained that she had planned to leave everything as an inheritance for him, but that the circumstances had changed her perspective on family dynamics. The conversation stretched on for hours, with continuous revelations that completely changed everyone's understanding of recent events. Each new piece of information added layers of complexity to the situation, making it clear that reconciliation would not be a simple or quick process. Mrs. Beverly suggested that everyone needed time to process the revelations before making any definitive decisions about the family's future. She offered her home as a neutral space where additional conversations could happen if necessary, but also emphasized that each person needed to decide for themselves how to proceed. Tiffany realized that her position in the family had become untenable due to the exposure of her lies. She faced the real possibility that Caleb might end the marriage, leaving her alone to deal with her debts and addiction problems. Panic began to set in as she realized the magnitude of the consequences of her actions. During the drive back home, the silence in the car was deafening. Caleb drove, lost in thoughts about how he had been deceived and about the damage he had caused to the relationship with his mother. Tiffany, beside him, was desperately trying to find words that could at least partially repair the situation. The following weeks were marked by difficult conversations and painful decisions. Caleb demanded that Tiffany seek professional treatment for her gambling addiction as a condition for continuing the marriage. He also insisted on total transparency about all debts and outstanding financial commitments. Tiffany agreed to Caleb's conditions, but the reality of facing her addiction proved more challenging than she had anticipated. The first meetings with a gambling addiction specialist revealed the extent of her problem and the amount of psychological work needed to overcome it. Meanwhile, Caleb began a slow and careful process of rebuilding the relationship with his mother. He visited Mrs. Martha regularly, always accompanied by concrete gestures of remorse and efforts to demonstrate that he had learned from his mistakes. The process was painful for both, but gradually began to show signs of progress. Mrs. Martha, in turn, struggled between her maternal instinct to forgive her son and her need to protect herself from further disappointment. She set clear boundaries about what she was willing to accept and demanded concrete changes in Caleb's behavior before considering a full reconciliation. One of the most significant moments in the reconciliation process happened when Caleb asked to accompany his mother on a visit to the Harrison Creek farm she had inherited. The place held special meaning for Mrs. Martha, representing a connection to family history that she had hoped to share with her son under better circumstances. The farm, though small and in need of repairs, had a rustic beauty that deeply touched Caleb. He realized that his mother had kept the place as a kind of family sanctuary, preserving memories and traditions he had been completely unaware of. The discovery made him question how many other important things he had ignored about his mother's life and feelings. During this visit, Mrs. Martha finally opened up completely about her feelings during the period of separation. She described the sleepless nights, questioning where she had failed as a mother, and the days spent trying to understand how the relationship with her son had deteriorated so rapidly. Her words deeply touched Caleb, who realized the extent of the suffering he had caused. The conversation also revealed aspects of Mrs. Martha's character that Caleb had taken for granted. She spoke about her decision not to defend herself against Tiffany's false accusations, explaining that she had chosen to preserve her dignity rather than stoop to petty arguments. This revelation made Caleb admire his mother's strength and integrity even more. Tiffany, meanwhile, was facing her own internal battles. The treatment for gambling addiction was forcing her to confront aspects of her personality she had avoided acknowledging. She began to realize that her manipulations and lies were not just symptoms of her addiction, but also reflections of deeper issues of character and self-esteem. The therapist treating Tiffany emphasized the importance of her taking complete responsibility for her actions without trying to hide behind excuses about addiction or mitigating circumstances. This process was extremely painful for her, as it required facing the reality that she had caused significant harm to the people she claimed to love. One of the most difficult discoveries for Tiffany was realizing that her gambling addiction had developed as a way to escape feelings of inadequacy and insecurity about her place in the family. She had felt intimidated by the history and traditions of the Harrison family and had used betting as a way to feel in control of at least one aspect of her life. The therapeutic process also revealed that the lies about Mrs. Martha had been motivated not only by immediate financial needs, but also by deep jealousy of the mother-son relationship. Tiffany had felt excluded from the established family dynamic and had tried to eliminate the competition rather than find her own place in the family. These revelations created a foundation for more honest conversations between Tiffany and Caleb about the fundamental problems in their marriage. They realized they had built their relationship on fragile foundations, without proper communication about expectations, fears, and mutual insecurities. Caleb began to understand that his own neglect of Tiffany's emotional needs had indirectly contributed to the development of her problems. While this did not excuse her lies and manipulations, he acknowledged that he had failed as a husband by not noticing the signs that she was struggling with serious issues. The family's financial situation also needed urgent attention. The debts accumulated by Tiffany had significantly depleted Caleb's resources, and they needed to develop a realistic plan for economic recovery. This included selling some assets, renegotiating debts, and establishing a strict budget that could prevent future problems. Mrs. Martha, observing Caleb and Tiffany's genuine efforts to resolve their problems, slowly began to reconsider her decision to remain completely independent from the family. She realized that her isolation, while understandable as a protective mechanism, might be preventing the necessary family healing. Mrs. Martha's decision on how to proceed was influenced by a conversation with Mrs. Beverly, who argued that true forgiveness sometimes requires risk and vulnerability. The cousin observed that Caleb was demonstrating genuine changes in his behavior and attitude, and that denying him an opportunity to repair his mistakes could be a form of punishment that would benefit no one. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The turning point in the family reconciliation happened during one of Caleb's regular visits to Mrs. Beverly's house. This time, he brought with him detailed documents about the family's financial situation, including all of Tiffany's debts and the plans they had developed to resolve them. His total transparency about matters he had previously kept private demonstrated a level of trust and respect for his mother that had been absent for a long time. Mrs. Martha was impressed not only by her son's honesty, but also by the maturity he was demonstrating in facing complex problems. She saw similarities to the man her late husband had been, someone capable of taking responsibility for mistakes and working systematically to correct them. During this conversation, Caleb made a specific request that surprised his mother. He didn't ask for financial help or try to convince her to return home. Instead, he asked for her guidance and wisdom to navigate the family challenges he was facing. He acknowledged that his own decisions had created significant problems and that he needed perspective and advice from someone with more life experience. This respectful and humble approach deeply touched Mrs. Martha. For decades, she had offered advice and guidance to her son, only to see it ignored or dismissed in favor of younger or seemingly more modern opinions. Having her knowledge and experience actively sought by her son represented a fundamental shift in the dynamics of their relationship. The conversations that followed were rich in sharing experiences and intergenerational wisdom. Mrs. Martha told stories about how she and her husband had faced financial and family crises during their early years of marriage. She shared practical strategies for managing debt, rebuilding trust, and maintaining healthy family relationships even during difficult times. Caleb realized he had consistently underestimated the depth of his mother's practical and emotional knowledge. Her experiences with adversity had created a wisdom that books or professional counselors could not offer. He began to see Mrs. Martha not just as his mother, but as a valuable mentor whose advice could benefit his adult life. Tiffany, informed about these conversations by Caleb, initially felt jealousy and insecurity about the renewed relationship between mother and son. She feared Mrs. Martha would use her restored influence to convince Caleb to end the marriage. However, Her therapist helped her recognize these feelings as manifestations of her own self-esteem and control issues. With the therapist's encouragement, Tiffany eventually asked to join one of the conversations between Caleb and Mrs. Martha. She had prepared a formal apology she had worked on in therapy, specifically acknowledging each lie she had told and each harm she had caused. The preparation process had been emotional and challenging, but also liberating for her. The meeting for Tiffany's formal apology was tense and charged with emotion. She read her prepared apology, which included specific acknowledgement of her lies, manipulations, and the impact of her actions on the family. Her tears were genuine, reflecting not only remorse but also relief at finally being able to be honest about her failings. Mrs. Martha listened to the apology in silence, processing both the words and Tiffany's body language. Decades of life experience had taught her to distinguish between genuine remorse and emotional manipulation. She perceived that this time, Tiffany's remorse seemed authentic, though she also recognized that words would need to be followed by consistent actions over time. Mrs. Martha's response to Tiffany's apology was carefully measured and wise. She expressed appreciation for Tiffany's honesty, but also emphasized that forgiveness would be a process requiring consistent behavioral changes over time. She did not offer immediate forgiveness, nor completely reject the possibility of reconciliation, creating space for growth and demonstration of genuine change. This balanced response impressed both Caleb and Tiffany. Mrs. Martha demonstrated that she had learned to protect herself without becoming vengeful or cruel. Your approach offered hope for the future, while maintaining realistic expectations about the process of rebuilding trust. In the following months, the family dynamic began to slowly evolve toward a new normal. Tiffany continued her treatment for gambling addiction and demonstrated consistent progress both in overcoming her addiction and in developing more honest communication skills. Caleb worked to rebuild his trust in both his wife and his mother, learning to balance his family loyalties in a more mature way. Mrs. Martha gradually began to participate more actively in family life, but on terms she herself set. She maintained her financial and residential independence, but accepted invitations to family lunches and special occasions. This approach allowed her to protect her autonomy while contributing to the family's healing. The Harrison Creek farm, inherited by Mrs. Martha, became an important symbol of the new family dynamic. Instead of selling it immediately as she had originally planned, she decided to turn it into a family project where everyone could contribute work and resources. The place became a space where the family gathered regularly, creating new positive memories while honoring their traditions. Caleb discovered that working on the farm with his mother created opportunities for deep conversations that had been missing from their relationship for years. They discussed not only practical matters related to the farm, but also family memories, values, and hopes for the future. These conversations helped heal old wounds and strengthen their connection. Tiffany, initially hesitant about participating in the farm project, found that physical work and connection to the land offered a healthy way to deal with stress and anxiety. The project also gave her opportunities to demonstrate her commitment to the family through concrete actions rather than just words. The progress in Tiffany's therapy revealed aspects of her personality that had been obscured by years of addiction and manipulative behavior. She discovered talents for organization and planning that could be constructively applied to family and financial management. This discovery contributed significantly to her self-esteem and sense of worth in the family. The family's financial situation also began to stabilize through a combination of careful planning, hard work, and some temporary sacrifices. Caleb and Tiffany developed a strict budget that included systematic debt payments while still allowing some flexibility for emergencies. Mrs. Martha occasionally offered advice on financial management based on her own experience of overcoming economic difficulties. 1 year after the initial reconciliation, the family decided to formalize their new dynamic through a written family agreement that established clear expectations about communication, finances, and conflict resolution. The document was not legally binding, but served as a concrete reminder of the commitments each person had made to maintain healthy family relationships. The process of creating this family agreement revealed the significant growth each person had experienced. Caleb demonstrated mature leadership by facilitating difficult discussions. Tiffany showed honesty and humility in acknowledging her limitations and committing to ongoing transparency. Mrs. Martha exhibited wisdom and compassion in balancing self-protection with family support. During one of the regular family meetings at the farm, Tiffany made an announcement that surprised everyone. She was pregnant. The news created a complex mixture of joy, anxiety, and hope. Everyone recognized that the arrival of a baby would add new dimensions to the family relationships that were still in the process of healing. Tiffany's pregnancy brought a sense of renewed purpose to the family. Mrs. Martha, anticipating her role as a grandmother, began sharing family traditions and knowledge about childcare that had been passed down through generations. Caleb Harrison found himself motivated to work even harder to create financial stability for his expanding family. For Tiffany, the prospect of becoming a mother added a powerful motivation to maintain her gambling sobriety and continue developing healthy behavioral patterns. She wanted to be a positive role model for her child and contribute to creating a stable and loving family environment. The months of pregnancy provided additional opportunities for family healing. Mrs. Martha shared stories about Caleb's pregnancy and early years, creating connections between generations and helping Tiffany feel more integrated into family traditions. Caleb developed a deeper appreciation for his mother's experiences as a single mother during his formative years. The childbirth was a moment of complete family unification. Mrs. Martha was present at the hospital, offering emotional and practical support. Caleb experienced fatherhood with a mature perspective, informed by the lessons learned during the previous family crisis. Tiffany faced motherhood with a combination of excitement and determination to be the best version of herself. The baby, a girl they named Willow, brought a new and positive energy to the family. Her presence served as a constant reminder of the possibilities for renewal and growth. Mrs. Martha delighted in her role as grandmother, finding new purposes and joys that had been missing during the difficult months of family isolation. Tiffany discovered that motherhood offered emotional fulfillment she had previously sought through gambling. Caring for Willow required constant attention and provided immediate rewards that were genuine and lasting. This discovery significantly reinforced her recovery from addiction. Caleb watched his wife's transformation into a mother with admiration and renewed hope for their marriage. He saw concrete evidence that people can genuinely change when they are committed to personal growth and when they have adequate support. His own experience as a father also deepened his understanding of the sacrifices his mother had made for him. Harrison Creek Farm became a family retreat where 3 generations gathered regularly. Willow grew up exploring the land her great-grandmother had preserved, learning about her family roots and developing connections with nature. The place that once represented family secrets became a symbol of transparency and unity. During one of these family gatherings, 2 years after Willow's birth, Tiffany made an announcement that demonstrated how much she had grown personally. She had decided to start a support group for people with gambling addictions in the local community. Her personal experience and the support she had received from the family motivated her to help others facing similar challenges. Tiffany's decision to become an advocate for addiction recovery represented a complete transformation from someone who had used manipulation to hide problems to someone willing to use vulnerability to help others. Caleb and Mrs. Martha were proud to support her efforts, offering Harrison Creek Farm as a location for group meetings when needed. The support group became successful, attracting people from several neighboring communities struggling with gambling addictions. Tiffany discovered that her personal experience, combined with formal counseling training she decided to pursue, made her particularly effective in helping others. Her work also provided additional purpose and reinforced her own recovery. Caleb Harrison developed a renewed respect for his wife's strength of character as he watched her transform her most painful experience into a tool to help others. He realized that true redemption doesn't just involve stopping destructive behaviors, but also using past experiences to create positive value in the world. Mrs. Martha observed the transformations in her family with deep satisfaction. She had witnessed the near destruction of family relationships through lies and manipulation, but had also seen the power of genuine forgiveness, hard work, and commitment to personal growth. Her patience and wisdom during the most difficult moments had contributed significantly to the family's healing. The Harrison family's story became known in their community as an example of how families can overcome serious crises through honesty, forgiveness, and hard work. Neighbors and friends often sought Mrs. Martha's advice on resolving family conflicts, recognizing the wisdom she had demonstrated in navigating her own family crisis. 5 years after the events that nearly destroyed their family, Caleb reflected on the lessons learned during a conversation with Willow, who was now beginning to ask questions about family stories. He chose to share age-appropriate versions of the difficulties the family had faced, emphasizing themes of honesty, forgiveness, and personal growth. Willow grew up in a family that valued open communication and constructive conflict resolution. The traumatic experiences of her parents and grandmother had created a foundation of family wisdom that would benefit future generations. The child learned early on about the importance of honesty, the consequences of lies, and the power of genuine forgiveness. Tiffany continued her work supporting people with gambling addictions, eventually expanding to offer workshops on healthy family communication and conflict resolution. Her personal transformation had become a source of inspiration for many people struggling with their own behavioral and relationship challenges. Harrison Creek Farm developed over the years into an informal community center where various families gathered for events and celebrations. Mrs. Martha, now recognized as a respected matriarch in the community, often hosted events that promoted family unity and mutual support among neighbors. Caleb developed a deep appreciation for his mother's resilience and wisdom, often seeking her advice on important decisions, even long after their initial reconciliation. He learned to value intergenerational perspectives and to integrate family traditions with modern approaches to problem-solving. The marriage of Caleb and Tiffany, rebuilt on foundations of honesty and mutual commitment to personal growth, became stronger than it had been before the crisis. They developed communication skills that allowed them to face future challenges constructively, using their past experience as a guide for navigating difficulties. The Harrison family also became active in community initiatives related to addiction prevention and financial education. Their personal experiences gave them credibility and motivation to help other families avoid similar pitfalls. They often spoke at community events about their challenges and recovery. During one such community presentation, Tiffany reflected on how seemingly small lies can grow into devastating family crises. She emphasized that true family intimacy requires courage to be vulnerable and honest, even when the truth is inconvenient or embarrassing. Her message resonated deeply with audiences facing their own family communication challenges. Mrs. Martha, now at a stage in life where she could have chosen to retire from active family responsibilities, instead found new purpose as a mentor, not only for her own family, but for many others in the community. Her experience of nearly losing her family due to manipulation and lies gave her unique perspectives on forgiveness and reconciliation. The family's story also served as a reminder to the community about the importance of verifying information before making judgments about family conflicts. Many neighbors had heard rumors about problems in the Harrison family, but few knew the full truth. The experience taught them to be more cautious about accepting one-sided versions of family disputes. Willow, growing up in a family that had learned to value honesty above convenience, developed strong character skills early on. She learned through family examples that taking responsibility for mistakes, though difficult, ultimately leads to stronger relationships and more meaningful personal growth. The legacy of the family crisis also included practical changes in how the family managed finances and made important decisions. They implemented transparency systems that prevented financial secrets and created processes for important family decisions that ensured all voices were heard. Tiffany discovered that her experience with nearly losing her family due to addiction gave her a unique perspective on the value of authentic relationships. She became particularly skilled at helping others recognize how addictions can sabotage family relationships and develop strategies for rebuilding trust. Tiffany's work with addiction recovery eventually led her to pursue formal education in counseling and family therapy. She found that her combination of personal experience and professional training made her especially effective in helping families navigate crises related to addictions and destructive behaviors. Caleb Harrison, influenced by the transformations in his family, also became more active in the community, often offering his practical skills to help families facing difficulties. He found significant satisfaction in using his experience of nearly losing his family to help others protect and strengthen their own family relationships. Harrison Creek Farm continued to serve as a place of healing and renewal, not only for the Harrison family but for many others who found peace and perspective in the natural environment. Mrs. Martha often commented on how the place she had nearly lost due to family manipulations had become a symbol of hope and renewal. The lessons learned by the Harrison family during their crisis became part of the fabric of their community. The story of how lies nearly destroyed a family, but how honesty, forgiveness, and hard work allowed not only recovery, but growth beyond what they had previously experienced, inspired many other families. 10 years after the life-changing events, the Harrison family gathered at Harrison Creek Farm to celebrate Willow's birthday. The celebration included not only immediate family, but many people from the community whose lives had been touched by the family's transformation journey. During the celebration, Mrs. Martha, now 82 but still vibrant and active, reflected on her family's journey. She observed that the crisis, which had nearly destroyed them, had ultimately become the source of strength and wisdom that had made them more connected and resilient than they had been before. Tiffany, now a licensed counselor specializing in addiction and family therapy, continued to use her personal story to help others. She often spoke about how the experience of nearly losing her family due to her own destructive actions had become the most powerful motivation for personal growth and service to others. Caleb had learned to balance his family loyalties in a mature way, never again allowing manipulation or incomplete information to influence his decisions about family relationships. His experience had made him a wiser husband, son, and father, capable of navigating family complexities with discernment and compassion. Willow, now a bright and emotionally intelligent child, had grown up in a family that valued honesty, forgiveness, and personal growth. The experiences of her parents and grandmother had created a foundation of family wisdom that would benefit her throughout her life. The Harrison family's story served as a testament to their community that even the most devastating family crises can be overcome through a commitment to honesty, a willingness to forgive, and dedication to personal growth. Their journey from near destruction to complete renewal inspired hope in many other families facing their own challenges. End of story. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought. Do you believe Caleb made the right decision in forgiving Tiffany? Share your opinion in the comments with sincere words. We would love to read your perspective. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.